Hello and welcome. I know when we have a little intro, our little live dance doesn't have to happen, but it's still fun to do.
I know.
So hello everyone. I'm Safrianna Luna and this is
Ikenna, hello.
and we are Living Luna and we are here today to talk about the launch of Shadow Alchemy, a project that has been 6 months in the making. It's finally here, and I am just so thrilled that it's here because I really do believe it's going to make a big impact in the world. So, honoring where we're at and where we've come from, and calling in some guides today. I just want to be in the energy of the launch and celebrate. So, like as someone who's been on the outs, like you're in the project, but you've been outside of the administrative aspects of the project,
Yeah.
right? Like I could speak to that, but like you've been a participant, you've been a part of the energy. So I just want to start there. Like, what has it been like for you as a participant, looking in from the outside?
Oh, I mean, working with the with Jess, like, we first worked with her with Raising Wild Ones. Um and basically we just had an incredible time there, which was this container for support and for basically all of us were, if we felt new in any way, like green in the or scared in the writing process, like just like how she was with Raising Wild Ones, um, you and her for this round were incredible, as well as it felt like a space that even if you weren't an administrator, you could like hop in and offer support to others, in our group chat, and we pumped each other up and we supported each other through different things. And yeah, it was great to see that. And I felt not, I mean, I don't know if it was just because I feel like these chapters for Jess, for me at least, come pretty easily, pretty quickly. um I don't know why. I know that with some other of the authors it was kind of a trudge through the, I mean, just Shadow Alchemy, like trudging through the darkness.
Right.
um I'm sure if I had to write it now versus when I was like really welcoming the shadows a couple of months ago, I was like, oh yeah, I'll just crank this out, shadows aren't scary at all. um and now I'm like experiencing those shadows kind of like in real time, uh that I literally wrote for myself and others several months ago when I was in a better headspace. So that's really interesting too, to reflect on that as well.
Talk
So
about divine timing. Like now you get to go back and reread your own chapter and be your own wisdom in a way, which is what's really, really cool about these projects. And this is number 6 for me that's sort of collaborative in this nature. And number 3 for you. So, like, we have some experience with this, but this book, more than any other, has been one of like initiation and like whatever you're writing about, you're probably also experiencing like live time or are facing it with this eclipse. Like, there's been a lot of synchronicity and divine timing, if you want to call it that, like of people having these experiences that they needed to be initiated into this project. And it's just been like very, very energetically potent. So I want to acknowledge that. And what I would like to do right here and right now is just I'm going to be doing a ritual in a few hours, like literally what 6 hours? I can't do math. 5 or 6 hours from now, um, we will be doing an eclipse ritual tonight. But I want to just take a moment, even aside from the eclipse, to acknowledge the shadow that has been present for each of us and us as a collective, and just like clear the stuff that doesn't need to be there, right? Because some of the shadows And we look at this in the Shadow Alchemy book. I write about it in the introduction. I write about it in my chapter, and it's incorporated in the Body of Nine appendix. Is the shadow has sort of two aspects that we've ignored one of the really important aspects in avoidance of the other, which is that the shadow has an unaligned and an aligned aspect, just like the light has an aligned and unaligned aspect. And so for the unaligned shadows, like, let's just take a moment to allow some of those to maybe energetically lift, and for the aligned ones to allow them to come into the light a little bit more with, you know, the light of this flame, with the light of the sun, with the light that we're shining on one another. And I'm not going to go too far into energy clearing right here, right now, because that is what tonight is about. But just take a breath here to really just acknowledge yourself in all that you've been through over the last 6 months. So I was reflecting with my partner Justin earlier about this project. Shadow Alchemy was kicked off literally right around Samhain of 2023. So Halloween, All Hallows Eve and Day, like that holiday season where we're transitioning into fall, and we're really at the midpoint where we're transitioning toward winter and we're moving into the death phase. So all of us that joined the Shadow Alchemy project were, you know, initiated around that time. And I feel like the collective was too, where we just started to walk into the dark and into some of these collective shadows. And so much trauma has come up, family crises. I know so many people within the project and within the larger community had deaths in the family. There have been a lot of illnesses. There's been loss of platforms. There's been so many shadows that have come up that have been very uncomfortable for the authors as well as the people in the authors' lives. And you, if you're listening to this, we've all been through some shit. It has not been an easy 6 months for many of us, especially anyone who's tuned into the state of the world right now. And so just acknowledging these unaligned shadows exist and knowing we don't have to carry them all, but also acknowledging that the aligned shadows exist and we get to bring those into the light and we get to celebrate them. And that's so much of what this book is about, this Shadow Alchemy book. Every single story, every single chapter in it has been a story or a teaching, some form of wisdom of how someone has taken sometimes the worst parts of their lives or their most crippling character flaw that they believe is inherent to them, but really is just societally packed in there. All of these shadows came forward, and our authors all shared wisdom and light around them and healing for everyone else. So I'm excited to celebrate it. I hope you could just like let some of that unaligned shadow go and acknowledge it, acknowledge the beauty within you there for a moment. And yeah, so just wanted to offer that.
Beautiful.
I'm going to take a sip of my cacao.
Yeah, I mean, if you're thinking of, I was thinking of timeline stuff, you're speaking of October, right?
Mm-hmm.
So world stuff happening October 7th.
Yep.
That was when real, like, shit has
Turning
been
point.
hitting the fan forever, but man, that's yeah.
Yeah, there's been so many turning points around like this project timeline and world timeline and personal timeline. Like, it just all seems like this is some kind of great timeline convergence. And we all know, well, if you know me, you know I talk about timeline stuff all the time and looking at collective mental health. I mean, we have been seeing such a rise in talking about childhood trauma and generational trauma and codependency and toxic Hollywood, like you name it, it's coming forward right now to be looked at. And then, of course, there are much bigger things in the world like genocide and the just destruction of entire peoples and ways of life and nature and lots of not good stuff, right? So, what we all need is to come together and to be unified in knowing that the healing that we do within is having a ripple effect out on the collective around us. So I'm going to shuffle some cards over here. Ike, if you had some questions or anything that you wanted to get into, I'm going to just pull out some ascended masters who are excited to work with the collective in their shadows. So I'll have them over here for later.
Cool. Yeah, I remember you had posted something about the concept of shadow alchemy, which inspired Jess and you to like decide to write like to start this book project. Um, so can you give us like a little more detail as to like what inspired you to write that post? What caused there to be like the get together of like this is right, we need to do this project, like that sort of thing?
You know, I would have to literally scroll back and like try to find the original post at this point because I know as I left I retired from my therapy career in August of 2023, like right at the end. And then September, I dove deep into Body of Nine for pretty much the whole month. I traveled out that way. And then October, the shadows started coming forward big time. And I was acknowledging it and seeing that I was stepping into a new level of recognition of my own relationship with codependency and generational trauma and wounding. And I was getting ready to release Bumblebees and White Balloons, which is my debut novel. If you're not familiar with it, it is available. And this book is the shadow. Like, this book is me coming to terms with my pregnancy loss and exploring that through the lens of characters. And so this was bringing up big shadow stuff as I was preparing to release my voice into the world, as a big debut of a particular style, because everything I've written so far has pretty much been nonfiction and short story. So all of the like writing stuff was really putting me in a pressure cooker because I was having to sort of contend with visibility issues, like feeling imposter syndrome and dealing with boundaries in my family, and just all kinds of stuff was coming up. And so I was just writing about it. And that's where the the book started coming up. And yeah, I just did some digging in the background for me, being a little techie over there. 10/9 2023 was when I wrote about what is shadow alchemy. And at that point, I'm pretty sure I had already written some other things about it, but that was the first time that I was like, this is like almost a technique, but it's not one technique. Shadow alchemy is literally this process of just working with the stuff in here that we don't want to work with, we don't want to look at, to bring it forward into the light and see if it's ready to be harmonized or if it's ready to be released. Like, those are the two choices. If we're holding it captive under the surface, right, it's like bubbling and it's really uncomfortable and it causes all of these issues to come up. But if we're like, hi there, I see you, and we pull it out, it's either, oh wow, like you're a hidden dream that I've been waiting to find this whole time, or oh gosh, like I need to heal this trauma and release this story. It's never life ending stuff that we find in there. It's life affirming or stuff that can lead us onto that next thrive. So yeah, basically I was writing about it a lot. Jess saw it. Long story short, she ended up messaging me and she's like, so shadow alchemy, like, can I use that? And I was like, yeah, like absolutely. And we could do a book about it. Like, you want to do it together? And next thing we know, she basically pocket dialed me and her guides would not let her hang up the phone. And we decided to move forward with it. So that was mid-October of 2023. And then Samhain hit And that's when we started enrolling authors and getting people on board and amping up the energy, and it's just been building and building and building
Yep.
until today. It's here, the baby
It's
is born.
here.
Yay.
Yeah, I mean, that's all incredible, and the fact that you and Jess are so like intuitive in listening to your signs, like I think that's the thing that really a lot of it, like that's the thing about shadows is a lot of times like we are in such denial of the shadows and we don't want to look at them, that even when there are signs to look at the shadows, we're like, well, that's extra sign for me not to look at them. Like
Let me go deeper into avoidance. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's definitely like this book is like, don't avoid, because when you uh avoid it, you don't see the wisdom in it. When you pull it out, you actually get so much more empowered and aware and awake and all of that. So, oh my gosh, I just got a message that one of our authors has been asked by like nearly 50 people for signed copies, and she's like, "Oh my god, what do I do?" Yeah,
Start
like
signing.
start signing, order your books and start signing, friend. Like, oh my gosh. So it has, like I said, the energy's been building and it has built to today. And I love that you mentioned like the signs and whatnot, because that's actually part of what brought some of our authors on. So sometime late last year, Justin and I were driving along, and all of a sudden we saw a white groundhog on the side of the road, and like I screamed and like pulled the phone out, and I'm trying to get pictures, and that called in one of our authors because it was like a spirit guide waiting for her. And uh, I know some people joined on like really synchronous days for them, or like there was some big life situation that came up, and then they were like, I need to be in this project. So it was a lot of people following signs and different paths along the road to get here.
Hmm. Yeah. What would you like going on the route of, you were talking about shadows, like the aligned versus unaligned shadow, um, and just the concept of shadow alchemy in general. Like, what would you consider the like? How would you describe like the book's ideal reader?
Yeah, the book's ideal reader is somebody who is open to the idea. They might not be there yet, but they're open to the idea that working with the shadow is actually the next best step for them. They're starting to recognize that, or they already know that and they just want more tools. Uh, this book is for people who like, it makes me think of the chicken soup for the like teenage soul, but this is like chicken soup for the self-development light worker, shadow worker soul. So it really is for anyone who is into that like self expansion model, and you heal by seeing other, like reading other people's stories. Like I think of, I love self development. So reading Dr. Tarai Trent's The Awakened Woman and like hearing about the traumas that she went through and like how she overcame them, super inspiring to me. And that like gets me going. And then I'm journaling and I'm ritualing and I'm like inspired. So this Shadow Alchemy is for that kind of reader. Like you like to get inspired to action by hearing real stories from other people. You enjoy having a variety of tools to try and like see, does this work for me, does this work for me, because we've got journal prompts, we've got breathing activities, we've got mantras, we've got art activities. Like there's a lot of different ways to self introspect with this book, or just read the stories, right? Like you don't have to do the activities if you're just like I like to read what other people have been through and that inspires me. Like there's so much of that in this.
Yeah, yeah. That reminds me of I just finished reading Tara Brock's Radical Acceptance book, and in that book, it's kind of layered similarly, where explaining the how to approach something, some stories about clients and like people that she's worked with, and her own experiences, like working through those concepts, and then a guided meditation at the end of each chapter.
Yeah.
And so that's essentially like what we're doing, but each chapter is a different person
Mm-hmm.
which can provide even more of like, if like, for example, if someone didn't connect completely with Tara's information, they're going to like drop the book. But for example, if one chapter does, or several chapters don't resonate with you with this book, that's why this book is so awesome, is because
Mhm.
it like basically this can be our time that we can talk a little bit about including Body of Nine in
Yeah.
this book.
Yeah, and I want to speak to that, and I want to acknowledge we have a comment that came in that I want to get to as well.
Mm.
So I'll just sort of preface here with, this book is also really exciting if you are in the Body of Nine community, if you've been curious about the Body of Nine community, because it is a premiere in that it is the first publication, first time ever formally talking about shadow as it relates to natural number. And so for those of us in the Body of Nine community already, this is like huge milestone, like you have no idea. For the rest of you, you're like, what? That makes, I have no idea what you're talking about. But this is like pioneering work in actual like human physiology and shared experiences, so it's super exciting. So we'll come back to that, but I'm not sure who left this comment because Facebook is weird about syncing. But they said, thank you for sharing this info about these past 6 months. For me, right after Samhain, it was just a steady walk through hellish experiences up through March. Even though I do not wish for others to suffer, I feel a sense of relief knowing that I'm not alone in this. I'm hoping this cycle is finished. Do you think that a shift is happening out of that? Oh, friend, I'm holding everyone that's feeling this way right now. The last 6 months have been a time of immense heartbreak for those of us who are awake and aware. And yes, you are not alone. And that is so important for you to hear and know deeply right now, that you are not alone. Okay, Michelle. So, Michelle and everyone else feeling like this, uh, our hearts have been deliberately broken. I say deliberately on a very cosmic scale there, on the big timeline stuff, because unfortunately, the heartbreak that I believe is about to follow is gonna break a lot more people. And that is not the news that I want to deliver. And it's the news I need to deliver, because those of us that have had our hearts broken over and over and over again recently are coming into greater levels of peace and harmony within ourselves. And we are going to be able to anchor that in and hold it while other people become awake and aware. Because that's the thing. If your heart is broken right now, it means you're awake. It means you're looking around and you're going, oh my God, the planet's on fire. That's not everybody right now. And that's like the jarring stuff, right? Sometimes we look around right now and we go, oh my gosh, how do these people not see this? How do they not see the suffering that's happening? How do they not? Many of those people are about to awaken and realize, and their hearts are about to shatter. So we get to be a part of this shift that is not necessarily happening like collectively. We're not quite there yet. But for the individuals who have been walking the path of hell for the last while, I won't even just say the last 6 months, but especially over the last 6 months, so long as you can stay anchored into compassion, awareness, especially self awareness, ownership of how you are perpetuating cycles of limiting beliefs and harm within yourself, right? Like you're overdoing, you're overcommitting, you're over involving yourself with stuff that you can't impact, right? All of that, you get to make choices. And as long as you make empowered choices moving forward, you're going to be able to sit with your heartbreak in a much different way that's going to allow you to hold space for some of the other people who are about to wake up to the heartbreak. I hope that answered that question. Again, not the news that I always want to deliver, but I am here to speak that collective truth. And it's not great out there right now, friends, is it? But we can make it better.
It's that unaligned versus aligned shadow, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you stayed unaligned, you'd tell people what they want to hear.
Yes. And I literally that's been my biggest shadow that I've had even over the last week with getting visible with this book project is I was like, what happens after this book project? Because I've been, I mean, everyone that's in my personal sphere, not even necessarily the people in the project, like all of the authors, but like Jess and Ike and Justin, like the people that are closest in my life, know that I have been throwing my all into this project for the last 6 months with helping edit and guide and organize documents and you name it, like shuffling things in the background. And so I'm like, wow, I've been spending all of this time and energy on this project and I'm about to have nothing to do. And I was like, okay, so I need to know or intend what I'm going to put in its place so that I don't just fill it up with, grief work. And, limiting beliefs and cycling the same drain of overworking that I used to. And so I'm like, well, what am I supposed to do now? And the message came in hot and clear that I am supposed to speak the truth that no one wants to hear and just keep sharing the big stuff that needs to be said. And of course that's terrifying and it makes me shaky, and that's my shadow, right? My fear shadow. Which brings me back to Body of Nine. But I also, Dory shared, my mama very unexpectedly gained her angel wings in November. Walking through that grief has been hugely transformational for me. One of my dearest friends and mentors gained her wings on March 25th. Thank you for sharing that. Like I said a little bit earlier, I know so many people that during this last 6 months have lost very significant figures in their lives, including several of our authors. And the grief chapter, to borrow a CD name from Mother, is never an easy one. Oh my God. Talk about the last 6 months. Grief chapter by Mother. If you have not listened to it, go buy yourself a copy of Shadow Alchemy and put that CD on in the background and prepare to have a time, because that CD probably got me through through the beginning of this
That's
year.
so funny because one of the questions I was going to ask you was like, did you? Well, I knew the answer of do you play music while you write, but if so, what did you listen to a lot to help you get through? And I guess that already answered the question.
Mother, the Kid Leroy. Like, it was a very interesting musical season. We wrapped up Shadow Alchemy with Fletcher and her new album. Yeah, there's been some good music in the last 6 months, because that's the ooh, this could be its own podcast.
So cute.
Music and collective music that's coming out, right? There's like the AI pop that we're getting, and the generic copy paste, but we're starting to get some really juicy pop that is really going into the shadow. And Grief Chapter by Mother is one of them. If you like rap, the Kid Leroy is a really young, like he's literally 19, and he's talking about dealing with addiction and losing family members and stuff in his debut album. Like, this kid's speaking up about the trauma, and that stuff gets me excited, because I'm like, our younger generations are speaking up more and more sooner about the realities that they're facing, which means that we have a better chance of breaking it. And when we start to hear that coming out in music, it means that more and more people are listening to that message and are starting to catch on. So I get very excited about that stuff.
Yep. The Matrix by Mother, I think was like the first song that they released
It was
before
one
the
of the
album.
first singles, yeah.
Yeah, and that came out November 20th. So that was like we were in the midst of the beginnings of.
Yep. And I am so grateful for this whole project opportunity, and it taught me a lot about my relationship with the Matrix, so to speak, and how I don't want to be moving forward. And I'm thrilled that I get to start talking on all of those things, kind of starting tomorrow after this launch is wrapping and we're celebrating, which, just to celebrate, because I know we're live right now, we're celebrating, we're talking about all these things. We have officially hit #1 bestseller in Australia, who, brought the wave in first. And I believe we're #1 in mysticism as well as women's writing. So very, very cool stuff. And just celebrating, especially with our Australian authors. We have 2 authors who live in Australia. And are representing. So I would literally say something about every author, but I would be here for 3 hours because I would have so much to say. So another day, friends. Um, yeah. Did you have
Yeah.
anything else you wanted to explore?
Well, I mean, we talked about body of nine a little
Oh,
bit.
right. Oh, yes. ADHD. Body of nine. So, if you've been following Ike and I for any period of time, if you've been connected with Living Luna, if you've been connected with me, you have probably heard us talk at some point about Body of Nine. But in a nutshell, Body of Nine is an ancient wisdom that has been restored to us that teaches us about the physiological aspects of the human body and the reality that there are 9 different body types, human meat suits. We Susan really doesn't like that because there's some shadows in that word, right?
I've
But
called it a flesh vessel,
flesh vessel,
and I've
nervous filter
also
system.
I've mispronounced it, or one of my clients misheard me, and now it's a joke every time we talk about flesh vessel because they thought that I said flesh festival, and I'm like, I hope not.
Yes, your festival of gifts that you have within your physiological body and being.
Yep.
So this has been, Susan and Martin and the Body of Nine community have been studying this information for about 20 years now and have looked at nearly 10,000 people and have brought it down to a science of actual physiology, muscles, fascia, facial structure, etc., that shows us that there are 9 different types of people and they all bring a gift and they all have a shadow. And before now, we haven't really talked about the shadow. And now we're starting to be able to go there and really unpack it in a trauma informed way because there's enough therapists in the Body of Nine community now to really like look at nature versus nurture. And I'm so excited because we address that in this book for the first time that with our natural number, and I think that this is true of the shadows in general, but like there is the unaligned that's based off of nurture, our trauma, our junk. Then there's the shadow that's our nature that we hide because we're scared or ashamed or we're afraid we're going to disappoint somebody or we're going to get rejected if we show who we truly are. But that shadow is really who we are. And we hide it because of that fear, shame, disappointment. So talking about that in Body of Nine is huge so that we can bring that to the light.
I was trying to think of an example of like, you know, so like the concept of I'm a natural number 1 and shame is the Achilles heel to natural numbers 1, 5, and 7. Um, and the shame spirals look different for each of those natural numbers. But basically, like, I was trying to think of what you meant by like aligned versus unaligned shadow. So this will be like in real time checking to see if this is correct
Okay.
to a point. So like the like unaligned shadow is like the shame spiral ultimately. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's just what happens. Like that. But the aligned shadow is kind of like when my on wonder kind of goes into this hyperdrive mode, to the point where I just get so like everything's awesome because I see this thing and I can't not see it now and holy shit. And but I had an experience, I think, of both the aligned and unaligned shadows coming together in a very visceral way when you and Justin were over the other day and you shared with me about like how I felt like I was all about feeling the discomfort and I was so excited about it and I was so like
This was like
awe and wonder.
early Shadow Alchemy project, like well, no, it was like midway through. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it was like January, February. I was like, I'd fallen in love with the concept of like life is just about experiencing sensations and
The
everything feels
discomfort.
uncomfortable and you just got to lean into it because that's you living life, man. And and apparently in that process, like, uh, I guess like Justin made a funny meme of like one of my headshots and like laser beams like coming out of my eyes of like, oh, here I goes talking about leading into discomfort again. And it's like, the on wonder of like talking about that, I would say would be more the aligned shadow, but then the shame about that on wonder and talking about it is more of the unaligned. And I was experiencing both viscerally at this. So I was like laugh crying when you shared that with me.
I was like, oh gosh, I broke them. Oh no. Yes, like there can be an intersection in that, and it can be such a fine line because it really is like our perception and how we lean in or we lean away, how we reject or we accept, how we're compassionate or cruel, right? Like all of that makes a difference in how these things show up. And ultimately nothing is in alignment when it's mean, right? So our mean inner voices are never aligned. And that's important to acknowledge, that if we're coming at it without love, it's not aligned, because true alignment is love for all, including the shadow. Including the shadow, right? That's like the most important thing in all of this is we are not whole without the shadow. And there's a chapter in the book, one of the authors actually talks about, the two sides of the same coin, the light and the dark. They're still the same coin. It's just the heads and tails, and we have to acknowledge that fullness. So I love like all of the discussions that come up around what does alignment look like, what does harmony look like, what does what does unaligned and aligned look like in contrast, because that's coming home to ourselves when we can kind of find that line and figure it out. So
yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. I feel like I'll bring up this question that came up, and we of course can be like, we'll do a brief bring up of it and then do a podcast of it later, because I feel like this could definitely be a more in-depth conversation, because you were like, if it's mean, then it's unaligned. If it's out of love, then it is aligned. But also there are those there are those generational trauma wounds of the I'm saying this because I love you.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. We absolutely need to
or
do
like
a whole
the intention,
podcast
like,
about
but
that.
it's like, oh, I only did it because I had the best of intentions for you. The intention was out of love.
Yep. And so this is where we get to tune into, do I feel love from this for myself? Right? Because I just, as a brief example, I absolutely know what it's like to tell myself I need to work out of love versus out of being mean. Right? Because coming from love is like, I know that working out is really challenging and you have all kinds of stuff around it, and you're going to feel a lot better once you've done it, and you know deep down that you're going to feel so much better after you've stretched, and like, let's try it. Versus you are yeah, I don't want to go on the tirade because I don't want anyone to have that energy, but the like, you better do this or else you're not good enough kind of stuff.
I mean, yeah, there was that reminds me of a story in the Tara Brach book about one of her clients was an addict and basically had to schedule an intervention where the whole family came into the session room. And basically the like they could tell that the dad was very tense, like, oh no, this is going to be a time where they just like, spew a bunch of vile at me for how I ruined the family, And so Tara started and being like, all right, floor's open. And the wife just walks over to him and hugs him and just said, I'm so glad you're here. Like, I'm so glad that you made it here.
Yeah.
And he started crying, and like eventually, like essentially that opened him up to receive any further truths ultimately.
Yep.
But that idea of like love versus like mean pressury, it's so interesting because the result could be the same. Like, you'll still work out, but
the energy
is different. And I mean, that that's something that I talk to a lot of parents about as a therapist,
Mm-hmm.
because back in the day when behaviorism was a huge thing and you just want your kid to get the just understand how to be a human, how to, especially working with neurodivergent kids, that like development doesn't like follow the standard.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you want it to meet the standard at a certain time, then there's this anxious energy that like almost like anxious attachment to the standard.
Right.
And so that can cause you to, out of desperation, utilize fear tactics
Yep.
and shame tactics and disappointment tactics. And those tactics will get results, but it's not coming from love, it's coming from desperation.
Yep. And absolutely. And when we can feel that energetic difference, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like when someone's coming at it from like, I genuinely want you to be healthy and well, versus you are not doing things my way and I'm displeased with you, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So much we could unpack with that. And I'll just say, like, going back to Shadow Alchemy, we address some of these sort of mindset pieces and whatnot in the book. Like, there's a lot of great navigation of limiting beliefs and shame, fear, disappointment, and trauma, like just overcoming so much. And to remember that it's possible, right? And we're not perfect. We're not ever going to get to a place of perfection in this human embodied experience, but we can feel the energy of Om Pranamada, the this is perfect, that is perfect mantra, which is that everything in its imperfection is perfect. So, like, let yourself love yourself exactly as you are. That's ultimately our mission. And know that healing is possible for you. And that it doesn't have to be 24/7. You don't have to constantly be striving to get to the healed point. Um, I talk about, and I don't talk about it in this book, but I talked about it in another book. I think it was my other book with Jess, the Soul Alchemy, the concept of being healed and healing. Like, you can reach a point of self compassion and love where you're like, okay, I've done enough to know I don't need to keep doing it all the time. I've done enough to know that I can take a break, that I deserve rest, that I can recharge, that I can integrate, that I can pause, and I don't constantly have to be journaling and meditating and tarot reading or guru chasing or going to therapy or like all of the things all of the time. You're allowed to be like, I am healing simply by just being right now. So I want to throw that out there too.
I mean, many people like this sort of stuff can seem like kind of inaccessible and woo at times because they're like, this just seems very esoteric. But if we're to compare this to what we've learned regarding physical health, right? If you've ever gone to a gym and they'll be like, you have to have rest days. You cannot go and just be at the gym 8 hours a day every day and expect the same amount of gains as if you have rest days to have your muscles like actually kind of mend and like integrate
Right.
ultimately. So if we go based off of it that way, and also like rest days don't mean that you just sit and do nothing, right? Living life makes you experience the shadows all the time.
All the time.
So, like, even if you aren't doing those guided pieces of your transformational work, like, you're still going to run up against those different challenges that you have been journaling about.
Yep. And, just to plant a little seed here, because it'll be coming, there will be eventually, there's no timeline on this. There will be a much deeper shadow workbook that will be handcrafted by us therapists and the Body of Nine community, especially Red Moon Eagle, to really dive into the inner workings of this and like the very esoteric stuff. But Shadow Alchemy is definitely a very accessible text. Every author really made efforts to give you something of value that you can apply today if you want, or just a story, a glean of wisdom that, maybe you'll be inspired by. So we so appreciate your support and encouragement, and hope that you will engage with the book and the community. And I want to share before we wrap up today the sacred masters, divine leaders that leapt out for us to do this shadow work with. So we have Sopdet, and she is initiating us into our cosmic power with this eclipse and this book launch, reminding us that we have unlimited potential and that this is a sacred mission initiation. This moving in and out of our shadow and light is a sacred mission. And it's bringing us back to balance. It's bringing us back to harmony. And it's the most important thing we can do for collective healing. So keep on going. We have Commander Ashtar. And he is reminding us to be leaders within ourselves, leaders in our communities, and to activate that inner sense of leadership, because it's time for us to evolve. It is time for us to trust in our ability to guide others. This really speaks to the question Michelle asked earlier that I answered about the collective shift. Like, those of us with our hearts broken right now are the leaders that are going to pave the way for love to return and for heartbreak to not be the prevailing theme of the human race. So activate that leader and guide within you and know that it is there for you. And then we have Ishtar. And Ishtar is reminding us that we need to follow our hearts, that our truth prevails, that the truth prevails. And the truth is that we're not meant to be in suffering. Pain is an inevitable part of being in a 3D, human lived embodied experience, right? You stub your toe, you break a bone, a tree falls down, people get sick, right? All of those things are painful. They're uncomfortable. We lose people. Suffering is what we're experiencing on a mass scale, which is where pain gets tipped out of balance and stories that are false get slung around like ammunition. To perpetuate fear and pain and distrust and dis-ease. So the truth prevails, and that is what Ishtar is reminding us, to come back to the truth of our wholeness, of our worthiness, of our reality as love, and to know that we are whole, front and back, light and shadow, and we get to be all of those things. So these ascended masters and more are willing to work with you. Call upon your angels, ancestors, guardians, guides, God, Jesus Christ, whomever you work with, or just nature, your higher self, right? Call on your inner power, your higher power, to be this wave of change, because you're here, you're on this journey, you've been initiated, whether you realize it or not. That's not my doing. That is all of this. So happy eclipse. Be so gentle with yourself. Ike, is there anything else you want to share before we go?
No, I think you wrapped it up nicely. It's just such a nice, we haven't podcasted like this in a while, so I'm like, oh, I have more questions. Let's keep going. But
Yes,
we'll save that for the actual podcast that we're hoping to start back up soon. It's just, we're trying to make it so that it is a, like, we actually
a more
release it
thing.
in yeah, and we've come up with some pretty juicy topics.
Very juicy topics.
Mm-hmm.
Very. So yes, we will see you back here for the Living Luna podcast as it resumes. Maybe Ike and I will do some random lives where we just talk about things. If we can support you in any way, let us know. You're always welcome in the Living Luna community. Thank you for supporting the Shadow Alchemy launch, and we love you and we support you. We see you, we believe in you, and we want to uplift you above all else. All right.